I'm going to start with a poem. And it's a poem that probably most of you have heard, read, or maybe even memorized. But there's a story later on that I will explain why I started off with this poem. But it's by Robert Frost, and it's The Road Not Taken. Two roads diverged in the old wood, and sorry I could not travel both. And be one traveler, long I stood, and looked down one as far as I could, to where it bent in the undergrowth. Then took the other as just as fair, and having perhaps the better claim, because it was grassy and wanted wear. Though as for that, the passing there had warned them really about the same. And both that morning equally lay in leaves and a step had trodden black. I kept the first for another day, yet knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I should ever come back. I shall be telling this with a sigh somewhere ages and ages hence. Two roads diverged in wood and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. About 1911, my grandparents met in Billings, Montana. They both sang in the Baptist church choir. And they got married in 1912. And then in 1913, my dad was born. And when my dad was 7 years old, there was a traveling missionary or pastor or something that came into Billings, Montana. And my grandparents went to hear him speak. And he was Seventh-day Adventist. And my grandparents, just, and fell in love with him or his preaching, and so they joined the Adventist church, and my dad was 7. And there were no Adventist churches in Montana, so my grandpa, knowing my German grandpa, he started the first Adventist church in Billings, in Montana. Wow. And so my dad always joked that he never ever left the church because my grandpa would preach upstairs. My grandma taught the school in the basement, and then there was an apartment in the back that they lived in. So he basically never ever left the church. So anyway, time went by. My dad grew up. One thing that the Adventists had lots of rules, but one of them was that they believed you could fight, you could go to war, and they believed in going to war, but they did not believe in carrying arms. So when World War II came around, my dad joined the Navy, and he joined the Navy as a cook. And so he was in the Navy for 4 years and lived in Southern California. Well, after that, he had a Navy buddy that said, oh, let's go to Idaho. My dad had never been to Idaho. But he packed up with his friend and moved to Idaho. He met my mom in Idaho. My mom was born and raised in a town outside of Idaho, Mountain Home. And he met her and they married. My mother was not Adventist. My mother, I wish I knew if my mother was saved. I don't know. My mother never went to church, not because she didn't believe in God, but because she had epilepsy. And she had grand mal seizures. And I think, even though it was never ever talked about, it was never discussed. And I don't know. I guess back in those days, you just didn't talk about anything. And they never ever set us kids down and said, this is what's wrong with your mom when she has seizures. But I think she was always fearful that she'd have a seizure in church, and so she never went to church. And because of that, my mom and I were not very close. Her parents had kind of pulled away from her when she had started having seizures, and she kind of did the same with us as children. She was a wonderful mother. She was a stay-at-home mom. She, always had the house clean and cooked and sewed all my clothes and stuff, but she was very distant from us. And then my mom had a seizure when I was 18 and died. And so I never knew, but going back to my dad, he would take us from the time I can remember, my brother and I, he would take us to church every Saturday. And I had they were big into memorizing scripture. The first scripture I ever remember was, "Thy word have I hid in my heart, that I might not sin against thee." And and I remember tons of memorization that in the church. But the one thing that I struggled with was that they had lots of rules in the church, and you didn't go to dances, you didn't go to movies, you didn't, on the Sabbath, from sundown Friday to sundown Saturday, you did nothing. You didn't buy or sell anything, you didn't, you didn't eat meat. They're vegetarian, you didn't eat meat, and a lot of rules, which was not as strict in our home because my mom was an Adventist, but I spent a lot of time growing up in my childhood years loving going to church, but fearful of God, because all these rules that I was so afraid that you didn't wear jewelry. If I was going to put on a piece of jewelry, do you think that God was going to, I was on my way to hell because of that. And so it took probably until I hit about junior high school, my best friend and next door neighbor, her mom they were Nazarene. And so we were best friends, we did everything together. With her, which worked out fine because I went to church on Saturday, she went on Sundays. So I spent my weekend in churches. In junior high and high school. Yeah. And we started, in high school, we started a bus ministry, her and I, and it was kind of it was a very small church in a small town outside of Boise. And we would go knock on doors, a lot of very poor people, we'd go knock on doors and ask if we could pick up their children on Sundays and bring them to church. And so we did. We ran this bus every Sunday, picked up all these little kids, have amazing stories about some of these children that, we found out years later that had come to the Lord. It was just amazing. So anyway, I kind of teetered back and forth. My uncle was also an Adventist pastor, and I remember he called me one time and kind of was on my case because I wasn't attending as faithfully as I should the Adventist church. And I just looked at him, I said, on the phone, I said, "Uncle Jerry, here's the thing. I spent so many years worrying about rules that I never knew who Jesus was. Not that I think, amazing Christian believers, my grandparents, amazing Christian believers, and that's one part I'm going to stop because I brought something, speaking of grandparents. It took me until I was an adult to realize that my grandparents, we would go to their home. They lived in California, so we didn't see them all the time, but we would go to their home, and every evening they had family Bible time when we'd sit around and Grandpa would read from the Bible, and we'd talk about the scripture. But I brought my grandma's Bible, and it's just, to me, that just notes, tons and tons of notes. And in the Bible, she's got, underlined. She's got all kinds of. Go with the Bible. She's got everything underlined.
Yeah. Oh, wow, back then too. That's wonderful.
Yeah, she's all these scriptures that, and certainly as a worn Bible. And it took me as an adult to realize that my grandparents prayed for me and all of us. And so, I certainly loved my grandparents and thought my grandma was probably an angel on earth because she was just an amazing woman. But so back to the poem I read in the beginning. So I hit high school, and I went to a really large high school in Boise. There was, I think, about 600 in our graduating class. I remember sitting at graduation, and right there is when I said, "Jesus, I want to follow you," because I knew that I was starting out like you graduate from high school, it's like a new beginning.
Yes.
And I said, I have choices, and I want to follow Jesus. And I went up front and gave my, said the sinner's prayer and gave my life to the Lord. But I really think I was saved at high school graduation. And So then I went on and went to college. I can't say that I was the perfect Christian the rest of my life, no. I went to college and I went into social work, which back then it was some of the things that Julie was talking about, transcendental meditation, all this kind of stuff. And it's easy to follow the gang, I guess, the group. And then when I graduated from college, I was given, I did an internship with what's called psychological services there, but I was really interested in music and play therapy, and they gave me a scholarship or something to go to the University of California at Santa Cruz and take a summer class on music and play therapy. And so I went there, and that was in Santa Cruz. I don't know if you know California, but my grandmother had already passed away, but my grandfather lived in Watsonville, which was only like about 15 miles. And so I stayed the summer with my grandpa. And it was an amazing summer because I really got to know my grandpa. And he was 90 then, but he was still, I remember waking up one day and I could not find my grandpa anywhere. And I was going, where is my grandpa? And I looked all over, and pretty soon he comes back in the door, and he'd been out passing out tracts in the neighborhood at 90. And so that was an amazing story. And after, when I decided to come back to Idaho, that's when I got back on track and, got involved in a church and met my husband, and my husband, it came out, his is a whole other story. He came out of the LDS church, and he was, but he was saved in his 20s, and we married. We're so blessed now that we have 3 children, and they're all serving the Lord. Our granddaughter, she was 14 then. She got baptized last September, but they adopted a little boy out of Africa, out of Ethiopia. And he's 14 now. He's just a year younger than her, but I found today that he's getting baptized. It's a blessing, and it's a blessing to see the generations that have come. And I've gone through lots of memory verses that I said, oh, this is my favorite. But what has been my favorite for a long time is 2 Chronicles 20:15. Do not be afraid or discouraged because of this vast army, for the battle is not yours, but God's.
Yes.
And he's already won.
Yes.
That's great.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
Yes.